Okay, welcome to the third and what I hope is the final recording on a skeleton key to Emile Durkheim's Elementary Forms of the Religious Life. We need to get through, we're at the beginning of chapter 7, book 2. You know, I haven't been referencing the book very much. I'm going to have to a little bit more in this section, but I think this is about my 6th copy of the book, and I'm just sort of amazed at how marked up it is and written over and so on. So it's been an important book over time. So, I usually begin my classical sociological theory course by teaching, Marx, who's sort of our most important theorist of economic value and the structure of capitalism as a mechanism for absorbing value in an entire society that's been reconstructed in order to produce value. Surplus value. And so Marx is our primary theorist of value, and Emile Durkheim is our primary theorist of social values in the form of religion here. Okay? And so the two books really bracket my own theoretical interests. Most of what I do lies within the wheelhouse of both of these writers. And comparing and contrasting them has been an important part of the project of the critical social theorists that I work with, the symposiums for New Direction in Critical Social Theory that I organized here at Iowa State. Really, were often playing with the Durkheim-Marx interface, as well as Weber and Lacan and others. But that value. Parallel is a really productive one and a place to that important theoretical work needs to be done. Okay, so let's move forward then with the next sections of the book. So chapter 7 then is the origins of beliefs and the origin of the Totemic Principle and mana. Okay, so this is probably the most important chapter of the whole book. Where do these things come from? And what I'm going to be arguing here as we move forward is that just following him, page 236. Should we just go ahead and look at it? Yeah. The totem is before all a symbol, a material expression of something else. But of what? Well, it is the outward and visible form of what we have called the Totemic Principle, or God, but it is also the symbol of the determined society called the clan, right? So you have these two things. It's a socio-duplex as well as homo-duplex. So you have the imaginary world of gods and demons and devils and totems, and then you have the real social assemblage of the clan or of the church or of some other social collectivity. So the god of the clan, the Totemic Principle, can therefore be nothing else than the clan itself, personified and represented to the imagination under the visible form of the animal or vegetable which serves as totem. Okay? So that is probably then how is this apotheosis, this god, this formation of a god, or this translation of something material into sublime possible? How does it occur? This is what this chapter deals with then. So, but right here is sort of a summary of the most important ideas of the book. A God is a mirror of society. When society needs to see itself, it looks at its God, right? So, but the reality, the real principle, the real force comes from the social grouping itself. So here's from the Spencer and Gillen collection. So this is an Australian tribe. These are women with the white on, so in mourning, right? So this is a ritual of mourning. So, what do funereal rites require? Well, they require us to come together, to wail, to mourn, to cry, to bite each other here, to hit each other, to create physical trauma, But I just love this imagery here of the real presence of the other members of the clan who are there, who are providing something like felt comfort, right? So during the funereal rite, you really feel physically the presence of other people. There's a real force being generated here. It's made out of the musculature, the skin, and the words, the feelings, the emotions, the sentiments of those who are co-present in the group. It's a real presence, right? It may be thought of as something that comes from the totem as a principle or as an animal, but it's coming from people themselves. Here's another from the Spencer and Gillen collection. This is of an initiation rite. But again, I want you to see the real presence here of a social force. So this young man is being flung into the air by the force of the totem, right? But it isn't the totem, right, as in, like a witchetty grub that's come and carried him away. It is the men of the clan itself, right, who have come together and are collectively, again, using muscles, skin, coordination, joy, or whatever else the emotion here is, are throwing this young man up in the air. So he's feeling the physical presence, the undoubted physical presence, the undoubted reality, right, of some force, right, that has the power to throw him around, right? So it clearly is a force that's superior to the individual. The individual has literally been lifted above himself here, right? There's a social force that's been generated by the assemblage of these men that is greater than any of them individually, and that is experienced by the neophyte, right, as a force greater than himself, right? So it's the group, it's the totem, it's the totem, it's the totem, it's the God, right? It's the spiritual force. But again, what I want you to see here, that's the real presence of these men that are generating that force. Here's another image of the real presence, again, during a clan gathering. So this is a totem. I'm not even sure which rite this is that's being done. It probably doesn't really matter. It's just that what you're seeing are men in the guise of the totem, but it, again, the voices, the sound of drums, the chanting that's going on, it vibrates the body. It's a real presence. It really is felt. I was Catholic, right? And I'm telling you, there is still some music of the Mass that that is very moving to me yet. It literally vibrated my body. Organ music that vibrates your body when you're a little boy or something, right? Some of the sounds of the responses during the Mass, right, are things yet that again, I'm by no means an adherent of Catholicism anymore, but that the sound of that, again, it literally vibrated my body when I was young, and it still does now, right? It's almost like a muscle memory or something like that. So, but it's being generated again by an actual person playing and an actual priest and an actual, I mean, it's really there. The smell of incense during the Mass, right, can also do it. It's just astonishing how it carries me back. But at any rate, it's the real presence of the group that generates the power, right? Here's some more images again of these. You hear the sound, you feel the ground vibrate, right? The sound again penetrates your body. The sight absorbs your eyes. You can see things, happening and occurring, and it seems to be the totem itself that's animating. But again, the real presence of the group is necessary for it to occur. So here's some more elaborate funeral rites. Again, I think it's the carpet snake maybe, or a black snake here, but there's a group of women approaching these men. It's a trench, and they're going to be burying the arm bone of the ancestor in the trench, and so on, so that the ancestor will be able to be properly placed in the symbolic order after death. But very elaborate stuff. But again, look at these people. They're gathered together. They're performing rites. There's a belief. They're marked with the signifier of the totem. It seems to be the power of the sacred itself, the gods, the spirit, the totem that seems to be animating and directing what's happening and generating the effects that are being felt. But again, to Durkheim, the real presence of the assemblage is what's crucial here. Okay, the clan actually being assembled. The women crawling beneath the men in this trench, right? Ending with the placement of an arm bone, right? That kind of thing. crucial for a whole bunch of reasons to that group, but there it is. It's a real presence. Okay. So there it is. So again, as I always teach my students, it's like a mantra. It's not the content, it's the structure. It's not the content, it's the structure. It's what sociology does. We study the structure of particularity and the structure of misrecognition of those who are embedded within society, right? So the structure, the actual structure, is the clan. That is, and the totem is the symbol of this very determinate, very specific society, right? The clan itself, the real assemblage of human beings. But the content is the totemic principle, or the god, or the kind of the image of and the idea of the totemic animal. So they believe themselves, again, to be taken over by the spirit of the witchetty grub, but in reality it's a collection of human beings. And again, it's arbitrary what the actual totem is. It's the structure of the rites that determine the effectiveness of the power, okay? So the totem is doubled. It's both the symbol of the society itself, the clan, as well as the symbol of the sacred, the mana that's been organized and projected onto an imaginary object. Okay, so what's crucial in this chapter then is Durkheim is going to be making the claim, and through the rest of the book he'll make the claim, that societies have needed an imaginary support for the sacred. That there has not been a society in social nature that has assembled, generated the force of social power, and then been able to hold on to that force, to organize that force, to reorganize that force, and to hold together without projecting it onto some external imaginary thing. Here, a totem, right? So the symbolic structure of a society, the language and law, and the actual, the language and law of the society, that's what structures the real of the assembled group of people. And that real mana is generated by the real force of the people being there. And there have been a few societies that have been able to see mana, as this social force. But in general, it would dissipate if it weren't embedded in or tethered to a supporting imaginary. And that's what totemism is. It's what religion is. It's the supportive imaginary that allows the real of social force to be generated, to be stored, to energize the behavior of an actually existing group of people in accordance with language and law. It's a necessary imaginary support. Okay? So page 257 then. The immanent force and power in the moral order and moral authority and respect comes from the people themselves who are generating, who are the members of the society. Okay, so page 238 to 9, society generates moral authority. Society speaks through its members. We are spoken by society. Commands without deliberation. That's sort of the essence of a moral imperative. You don't deliberate it. You do it because you must, right? So there's psychical power of collective representations. So social pressure, collective force, moral authority, Durkheim is using these terms to refer to the real presence of the force of a society. It's structured by the symbolic order of language and law, but the real force itself is generated by, quite honestly, the embodied existence of the members of the group that are collected together. Page 240, there's a great passage regarding homo duplex, where the moral temperature is the pressure of the agitated assembly, and that leads to an elevated temperature, a magnification of the individual, right? The individual gets lifted up and magnified to become bigger and stronger than we are. The social collective self is overcharged, it's dominant, and so on. So that's on page 240. And this is one of those places where, it's just, in the midst of an assembly animated by a common passion, we become susceptible of acts and sentiments of which we are incapable when reduced to our own forces. And when the assembly is dissolved, and when finding ourselves alone again, we fall back to our original or ordinary level. We're then able to measure the height to which we have been raised above ourselves by social force. In the same way as that boy was being thrown up in the air by the power of the collective, he could actually see how much above himself he was able to get while transported by these moral energies. History abounds in examples of this sort. It is enough to think of the night of the 4th of August, 1789, when an assembly, right, the National Assembly, was suddenly led to an act of sacrifice and abnegation which each of its members had refused the day before, and at which they were all surprised the day after. right? It was the sacrifice of privilege, the sacrifice of really the first and second uh, um, um, estates, powers and privilege in the great, declaration really of the National Assembly as the sovereign force in France. And so, that happened under the pressure of the assembly that raised people up, right? So social action does not confine itself to demanding sacrifices, privations, and efforts. The collective force is not entirely outside of us. It lies within us as well and compels us to act. So, it just goes on again. Just wonderful passages in here, page 241. Examples of the force and how the force moves people and moves people along. But these are passing and intermittent states. There are other more durable ones. There are periods in history when, under the influence of some great collective shock, social interactions have become much more frequent and active. Men look for each other and assemble together more than ever. This creates a general effervescence, a fever, which results in a greater activity and characteristics of revolutionary and and creative ethics, right? Okay. So page 241 then, the leader or the agitator before a mass assembly uh, generates oratorical inspiration that they normally wouldn't have. Really these sections in here, we speak a language that we did not make. That's part of it too. But yeah, right here, page 243. A man is a man only because he is civilized. So could he not escape the feeling that outside of him there are active causes from which he gets the characteristic attributes of his nature. The world in which we live seems to us peopled with forces that are at once imperious and helpful, august and gracious, but that lift us above ourselves. Um, you know, um, the imperative power of the group. Yeah. So anyway, it's the idea. It's very similar to Freud's mass psychology and the analysis of the ego, where the real source of the power that appears to be carried by the charismatic leader is actually generated by the agitation of the assembled group. So this is where Max Weber's writings on charismatic authority directly parallel Freud in the mass psychology and the analysis of the ego, or here is Durkheim on mana, and as something that's generated by the group, but that animates the leader as well. So page 242, demon possession. One feels filled with the spirit, one speaks in tongues, and etc. And this is due to the real presence of amassed people, the fever of the people that are there, that are really enthusiastic, and we get swept along and swept away by it in this general effervescence. There's a current of energy that comes to us from without. There's a perception of real felt forces in agitated crowds, assembled groups. And then we seek to imagine what the source of that is. So again, you get this duality of social life throughout here. These two phases, these two kingdoms, as Durkheim says, right? The profane world is the first phase of individuated, diffuse, ordered activity, right? Informal activity that generates things like food and shelter and so on. And there's the second sacred phase of life, collective, assembled, generated together, right? Focused, powerful, right? And that society moves from the first world of workaday existence into the second world of the sacred, the first life of profane existence, the second life of the sacred, in the same way as an alternator generates electric current by completely flipping polarities en route. So society would literally wind down, right? That the moral flashlights, the moral light, the moral values that are held by people dissipate over time in individuated activity. And those values need recharging, or must be recharged, to remain potent in the collective. So the collective group comes together, they generate a force which then gets projected onto the totem, reigniting the values that then can be used to light the way of members of a society after the crowd has dissipated, or after the rituals are over. So page 244 and 5, there's moral power and moral force, or mana. And again, it would dissipate if it weren't fixed on something. So in order to not lose the power generated by a group, generated by an assemblage, that surplus power that's generated, it needs to be essentially placed into a storage container, an imaginary structure to grasp, to focus it, and to sustain it. It requires, quite literally, a bearer. In the same way that value requires a bearer, a commodity, so that it's not immediately lost. Okay, in Marx. Page 244 and 5. There's a crucial passage on the cult of reason, the French Revolution, where again, there was that little statement about a society that very briefly attempted to do away with its God and directly worship itself, right? We know it's us that's generating the power of the revolution. Let's just have a cult of the revolution instead of having a cult of God, which would be counter-revolutionary anyway. So it was one of the few moments in history when society killed the old gods without creating new ones, got rid of the middleman, quite honestly, the imaginary mediation, and then you had the direct relationship then between the real force of the assemblage, right, the mob and so on, and the symbolic order of language and law. Again, in like Mark Wool and I have written about Quakerism as having something similar to that as well. So page 246, two phases, a phase shift then between the sacred and the profane. In the Australians, it's the corroboree, the carnival, the festival that generates something like collective effervescence. There's a ritual inversion of the moral order there, transgressions, sleeping with women of the totem, swapping of literally of wives from one clan to another, eating the totem animal. There's all these kind of transgressions that generate collective, like electric current, right? This massive release of moral energy. Deleuze and Guattari, I'm reading it with graduate student Stephanie Clark Gibbs right now. The Thousand Plateaus. This is what a plateau is in many ways in Deleuze and Guattari. This moment of really, really intensive, agitated collective effervescence. Yeah. Okay. That then can't be held and dissipates fairly quickly. Okay, page 249. The individuals are possessed by society. We've already done this, right? They're overmastered. Oh yeah, they become reborn, the second self, right? We become dominated and carried away